Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. This is the day 2 MLF Chowan River recap. As you can see, I'm sitting here in Wisconsin and I'm not on the water like I normally would. And as much as I would like to be saying that that's because I had a camera defect and lost the footage, it has to do with the fact that I zeroed. Man, it is so tough to say that. And for somebody fishing at my level, it's 1,000,000% unacceptable. Not only does it lead to a bad video, it leads to a tough video to make on my end too, because these are not ones that I ever really want to have. You always want to talk about the good ones, but I also feel like I should talk about the bad ones, because a lot of times you learn more from your bad tournaments than you do your good tournaments. And in this case, I'm leaving the Chowan River with some pretty good learning experiences, but I'm still pretty frustrated. Well, I'm 100% frustrated, but I'm pretty confused as to why it didn't go so well. You know, I had a good practice. My first day of practice, not good at all. Second day of practice was pretty good, where I had, 12 to 15 scoreable bites. Third day of practice, which I only fished till noon because we can only fish till, we get about a half day of practice in. I had another dozen bites, and a couple of those were absolute tanks, like just monsters. And I was fishing, all those bites were coming on top waters. I had the hooks rolled in, so I didn't hook any of them. I caught the first two fish I caught in the morning of day 2 of practice. I caught one was probably a 2 3/4, one was a 2 1/4, and both of them, they ate the bait great. They ate the bait great through the rest of practice. Come day 1 of the tournament, I had stuck with the topwater all day long, and I had 7 scoreable bites, and I only landed 2 of them. They just were not eating it the same way. I had a couple come up and actually tail slap the bait. I had a couple come up and just, flush underneath the bait, but never actually even hit the bait. Just different than what they were doing in practice. And what I was throwing, for the most part, I had a bunch of different topwaters. In practice, I had bites, a couple of bites on a frog, a couple bites on a popper, a couple of bites on a buzzbait, and the majority of them, though, were coming on a chopo. This is the small size chopo. This guy in the black color. That's what I was getting the majority of the bites on. And it was interesting to me because where I was fishing, well, I guess most of the river, honestly, most of the river is just a cypress line bank, and you're just kind of picking down a stretch and going. And because of that, if there's other boats in your area, you're all working the same stuff. And I had, I would say halfway through day 2, I had a couple of bites on various things, but I was throwing the chopo, and I happened to be coming head on with another competitor who was throwing a white buzzbait. We talked a little bit, passed, and they kept going, I kept going, and I had 2 really good bites right after they went through on this. And they had told me they didn't have any bites on the stretch. They could have been lying to me, they may not have been, but I never saw them on that stretch in the tournament, so I don't really think that they were not being truthful. But the point is, they were close enough to where we passed, where I probably could have even heard the bite, and he may have heard the bite on the chopo after they went through. But that kind of just made me feel like, you know what, probably nobody else is throwing a treble hook bait like that. I was making very precise casts. Obviously, I was getting hung up once in a while. You catch a knee, or you make an errant cast and you get caught in an overhanging branch off one of the trees. But I really felt like I had a bait that sounded different than the buzz baits that everybody else was throwing, and and I was getting the bites in practice, so that's what I stuck with. And they just were not connecting on day 1. And I'll tell you, the only other real thing to do there in the Chowan River, if you're there, is to not necessarily get way offshore, but outside of all the hard lines of trees, of cypress trees, are a lot of dead trees. There's wood everywhere, there's big stumps everywhere, there's some brush piles. And I spent decent amount of time on day 2 and day 3 of practice fishing in that 6 to 10 foot range, and I caught a pile of fish. I wasn't jerkbaiting, I was throwing the hover rig, and I caught a pile of fish. The thing with it is not one was even remotely close to being scoreable. Now, in hindsight, I did have a couple of bigger blobs that kind of followed the bait that told me, hey, these are probably bass. But I will also say there were a lot of gar on that lake. There were a lot of catfish, and they also seemed to be pretty aggressive because I caught lots of gar and lots of catfish as well. So I don't know if those big blobs were in fact bass or not. Generally, you know, from what I'm seeing takeaway wise from the competitors is, you know, that the bass were holding to those stumps tight. And, you know, if that's where the fish were coming from, the likelihood is they were bass. And those couple big blobs I had in practice were coming from a stump, so it's very possible they were bass. The point here is I did it for a lot of time in practice, and I was catching substantially more fish doing that, but not one was a keeper. And honestly, in hindsight, you know, if the majority of the small population is offshore, the bigger fish are probably offshore too. And I should have probably stuck with it, but it's hard when you feel really confident in throwing, you know, top waters around. And, you know, I was getting a decent number of bites. Even on day one, I should have had, you know, if I connected with those fish, I would have been inside the top 20. It is what it is. I'm not really trying to make excuses, just kind of talking through what happened on the day. So day 2 came around, the morning. I never had a good bite on the top water, caught a few shorts. So I decided I'd go offshore or out from the trees and fish some of that submerged cover, and I did that. Well, I did it for an hour to end period 1. I did it pretty much for the entire period 2, and again, just caught dinks. And at that point, I'm like, I gotta go back to the trees with the topwater bait where I feel like I can at least catch some keepers. The day before, the afternoon bite was much better than the morning bite. And I'm like, I'm gonna go back, and I committed to it. And I caught, you know, several more shorts, 5 or 6 shorts. Never had what I would consider a scoreable bass bite, which is really frustrating. It has really hurt me from a point standpoint, and I put myself in a hole where I really got to start. I need to end the year with 2 good tournaments. So that's it, guys. I don't have any on the water footage for you from day 2. It just didn't feel like it was worth showing you a bunch of 10-inchers. Congratulations to my buddy Drew. Pulled out the win for the house, so that was pretty awesome. Maddie Becker had big bass of the tournament, so that was cool. Overall, you know, I wish I had been there with him. So hopefully at the James River we can put it together. Thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for all your support. We'll get this ship turned around and headed in the right direction.